Hey guys, how's it going? Reed here. We're about to have a very interesting discussion, a very interesting discussion on lithium and the signal transduction cascade. This is part two. Go back to the previous podcast I did on the signal transduction cascade. And from there, you'll see how the signal transduction cascade is the mechanism that transfers the signal from the receptor to the cell body. The ligand binds the receptor on the outside surface. That goes through a signal transduction cascade process, and then the product of that is sent to the cell body so the cell body can produce a response, which is typically a product that can likely be exported out the cell or placed on a cell membrane. Right? So it's important to know, and this is very important because what happens is that when you are treating patients and they have a partial response, when they have a partial response, that implies that you likely blocked all the receptors on the postsynaptic receptor. You blocked the majority of the receptors, and you're not getting the response you want. The problem is that it may be problems within the signal transduction it may be problems within the signal transduction cascade in and of itself. And guess what helps with that? Lithium. Lithium helps with the steps of the signal transduction cascade by making it work better, it perform better, and it increases more stability for the entire cell. So we're going to go through that. Lithium is a very important medication. Okay, let me see here. I got hot sauce and fish. I got fried fish and hot sauce in the back of my throat. Jeez. Fried fish and hot sauce. Catfish nuggets and hot sauce. Okay. Explain. Explain the role of lithium in the signal transduction cascade. Okay. Lithium, widely used as a mood stabilizer in bipolar disorders, has multiple biochemical effects on signal transduction cascades in the brain. Its therapeutic effects range from modulating intracellular signaling rather than from direct effect on the neurotransmitter receptors, right? Its focus is not the receptor, it's the activities that happens after receptor bound. Jesus, sorry about that. I got catfish granules in the back of my throat. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so here, it doesn't bind directly. The effects is not directly on the receptor, the neurotransmitter receptors. It modulates the intracellular signaling, the things that happens inside the cell. Overview, what lithium does in signal transduction. Signal transduction cascades are how cells convert an external signal, like a neurotransmitter binding on a receptor, to an internal response, such as a gene expression or ion channel charges. Lithium acts downstream on neurotransmitter receptors, meaning it influences second messenger systems, especially the phosphoinositol system and the G protein signaling cascades. So look, lithium acts downstream of the neurotransmitter receptors, right? It influences second messenger systems. One, the phosphoinositol system, and two, the G protein cascade system. Key targets and pathways. Inhibition of inositol monophosphate, right? Modulation of G protein coupled receptors, right? And then C here, the effects on protein kinase pathways. Great. Inhibition of inositol phosphatase Now, this is amazing. Basically, it prevents the um, what it prevents the recruitment of PIP1 so that you don't have enough PIP1 to make PIP3. Very interesting. In a normal pathway, the neurotransmitter binds the G protein and that activates phospholipase C, which cleaves PIP2. That produces PIP3 and DIG. Now, PIP3 releases intracellular calcium right now. So remember, PIP2 is broken down into PIP3 and DAG, right? Now, this IP3 causes the release of intracellular calcium. Now, in sort of recycling, if we want to recycle IP, make more IP3, then we take inositol and we reuse it to make PIP2. Oh, wow. So PIP2 plus inositol makes PIP3 plus inositol makes PIP2 as opposed and PIP2. Okay. Skip that. Okay. So lithium roles. Lithium inhibits inositol monophosphatase and inositol polyphosphatase 1 phosphatase and blocks the recycling of inositol. So it blocks the recycling inositol. Okay, so you need inositol in order to get PIP2 back to PIP3 back to PIP2. Like here's PIP3 right here, which is that, and you want to get back to PIP2, so you need inositol in order to get to PIP2, then it's cleaved again. Yeah. So lithium blocks the recycling of inositol. Okay, this leads to the depletion of PIP2, right? Right, PIP2 is cleaved there. So it leads to the depletion of PIP2, reducing signaling through G coupling receptors. So it decreases the production of PIP2 and depletes the production of PIP2, and therefore it reduces the signaling. Okay, great. That's the feedback. Okay. Reduced overactive signaling in circuits linked to mood dysregulation. This is known as inositol depletion hypothesis. It's really interesting. So, yeah. So basically depleting inositol. Okay. Modulation of G protein coupled receptors. Okay. Lithium interferes with G protein cycling, particularly G1 and GS proteins. So lithium interferes with G protein cycling. It tends to reduce adenylate cyclase activity, lowering to lower CMP levels. So it reduces adenylate cyclase activity, lowering CMP levels. This modulates signaling in dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine systems. Okay, so basically it interferes with G protein cycling and reduce adenylate cyclase activity, so less cyclic AMP, and so nothing's going to run as well. You basically turn the whole cell down by reducing the cyclic NMP. Stabilization of mood via dampening excessive excitatory transmitter. So basically it results in stabilization of mood via dampening excessive excitatory neurotransmitter. We're talking about excessive excitatory neurotransmitter. Okay, great. Next, effects on protein kinase pathways. Lithium inhibits glycogen synthase 3, a key enzyme in many cell signaling, including with insulin neurotropic signaling. Normal function GSK3 phosphorylates various transcription and cytokeratal proteins, often inhibiting growth and signal and plasticity signals. Lithium directly inhibits GSK3 by competing with magnesium binding sites. The results increase neural protection and synaptic plasticity, promotes BNDF signaling, and supports mood stabilization neurogenesis. Yeah. So it inhibits glycogen synthase 3 And this results in increased neuroprotective synaptic plasticity, promotes brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and supports mood stabilization and neurogenesis. Yeah. Summary of effects in the cascade. So, okay, this is okay. Let me see here. The okay, the inositol pathway. Basically, lithium inhibits inositol recycling, and that decreases intracellular calcium signaling, right? In the cyclic AMP pathway, it reduces cyclic AMP production, and it results in less overstimulation of receptors. It targets the GSK3 pathway. It inhibits GSK3, and that leads to more neurotropic and neuroprotective signaling. And then here, this Krebs and brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It enhances via GSK3 inhibition. So you inhibit this, you get enhancement of these, and this increases neuroplasticity and mood stability. You know, lithium is a very, very important medication to use. And so I think you should probably consider it when you're managing your patients. And I think that's all I have for now. I think it's a pretty consistent discussion, but I think you got it. Well, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share. And if you have any questions about lithium, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. Okay. Otherwise, it's a pleasure talking to you guys. Read out. Take care, guys. Ciao. Um, hey, everybody. Nice to see everyone here. Um, so today I'm going to do maybe a 20-minute presentation on glutamate. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter, and glutamate is a neurotransmitter that causes a lot of excitation, so it turns things on. Glutamate is found, it's a G protein that transcends the entire phospholipid bilayer, and it is present throughout almost all the tissue in the body. And so when you activate glutamate, you get an entire systemic response. You get a systemic response in the entire organism. And so here, let me go through this presentation first. So, and then I have several of my team members here. And so several of my colleagues. And so I'll get into the presentation, and then when you feel comfortable, you can just raise your hand. I don't want to just put you on the spot. So, since this is your first stream, this is my second stream. So you're not too far behind me. Okay, so here, and we're going to take these materials and also use them for the students to sort of learn on. Also in the link, if anyone wants to join our team or become a patient, they can just click on the link and get access to us and schedule an appointment from there. Okay, so first, glutamate is a naturally occurring amino acid. Okay, plays a vital role as primarily in excitation of the central nervous system. It's involved in a wide range of brain functions: learning, memory, communication. Oh, it's a flavor enhancer. I didn't know I didn't know this monosodium glutamate was the same glutamate. I didn't know that. Okay. Okay. Um, okay. So let me look at the role of glutamate as a neuroreceptor. Is the most abundant excitatory neurotransmitter. Um, it stimulates cells to transmit signals. So because glutamate is present throughout all the tissues, when you produce, since the receptors are present throughout all the tissues, when you produce glutamate, it has an excitatory response on all of the organ systems. So it tends to stimulate the entire organism. As you can see here, it increases transmission of the signals going across the nerve. So it increases the network hyperactivity. It increases network activity. And that's the main problem we see when patients come into the emergency department. We see acute excitation, right? And so it gets so out of hand that we have to use medications at times intramuscularly to sort of calm them down. And so in this case, a lot of failure of these systems actually result in excitation or overactivity. Um, we have to handle that. Um, so it also plays a role in learning, memory, and overall neuronal communications. But I think this neuronal communications is a very important part here. I think because I think that's why the patients have it's so difficult to treat agitation because it involves so many organ systems. It's just not one organ system. If you use some of the medications to decrease the psychomotor activity, like decrease the muscles, where you still have the respiratory rate really high, you still have the heart rate really high, so it's tough to treat patients with this overexcitation, and then they can be very unpredictable. Okay, MSC, a food additive. Okay, naturally occurring. Okay, um, here it is. In excess, glutamate can be toxic to nerve cells. This is the key here. So, um, all the things that causes excitation, if it does it too much, it can cause the the cells themselves to die. Ecstasy, right? Ecstasy hits NMDA receptors, NMDA receptors, which causes excitation, overexpression of glutamate. And in many of those patients with NMDA or ecstasy, they start to have the memory and the brain damage associated with ecstasy use. And we pick it up on a unit with them not being able to recall or remember as many items. Same thing with the cocaine, overstimulating dopamine release and then glutamate overexcitation. So this neurotoxicity is a common it's a common pathway for injuries to predictable parts of the brain, particularly the hippocampus and where the memory is located in the prefrontal cortex. And so you see things like ecstasy, methamphetamines, cocaine. All of these are very things that target dopamine release, and so it causes a lot of excitation. And the patients who typically use those typically have the cognitive deficits and the memory problems associated with the damage that comes from overusing these substances too much or using for long periods of time. Here, glutamate receptors here, they interact with specific receptors on nerve cells. Here's MNDA right there again. Yep, here's the MNDA ecstasy, right? Okay. Um, Now, if GABA is yin, then if glutamate is yin, meaning excitation, then there must be another neurotransmitter that sort of serves the same function but turns everything off. Because it has to be some balance in the system, right? So there's also another neurotransmitter that's present, same thing like glutamate throughout almost all of the tissues. And its primary role is to turn things off. It's inhibitory. And that's GABA right here. So glutamate turns everything on, yin. GABA turns everything off, um, yang. This is why substances that target GABA are preferred. So, for example, alcohol targets GABA. Specifically, I believe it's the B site on GABA. Alcohol activates GABA. GABA imposes inhibitory tone. GABA balances glutamate the same way yin balances yang. And that's why patients with substance abuse issues, particularly alcohol dependency issues, may have to continue to drink GABA in order to balance their system for themselves. And what happens if the person who's dependent upon drinking GABA happens when it stops? When the patient can no longer activate GABA on themselves, then they don't get the inhibitory tone. So what happens? You get excessive excitation, what alcohol withdrawals, right? That excitation can get so bad that after like 12, 24 hours, they can have seizures. And if the agitation gets so bad, they can begin to have a delirium, specifically known as delirium tremens. And so um, that's glutamate. And let me see if I can take any questions so far. Let me see if I can go to the comment section, or if any of my colleagues would like to have any input or anything like that. Just please raise your hand. Let me know. Okay. So if anyone have any questions, okay, the first question I have here is, yeah, can too much glutamate actually damage the brain over time? Yes, 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 yes. And that's the problem. That's the problem. Remember, with patients with chronic severe post-traumatic stress disorder in that hyper adrenergic state, high cortisol, high adrenaline, really over excitation with glutamate, those patients like that typically start having develop memory problems, because the same high cortisol and that the hyper glutaminergic state causes brain cell death, and that's probably one of the mechanisms of cognitive dysfunction and memory dysfunction in chronic untreated PTSD. So it can bring over time. I say that's an example over time with chronic PTSD. That's why child abuse and unresolved early childhood events are very so traumatic, because they bring those childhood traumatic experience throughout their lives, and they have difficulty escaping from those experiences. Um, the glutamate actual brain damage in the case of methamphetamines, they may that drug is so potent, so potent, the overdoses may result in overexcitation and then eventually cell death. I think it's more through a process like Wallerian degeneration, something like that. But you can get the definitely brain cell death, and we pick that up on the neuropsych testing when we test as the patient to remember 12 items and try to see how many they can remember. So we pick it up there, and the deficits are rather severe. In fact, let me show you a few studies just to let you know how prominent this is. So we talk about um, glutamate. Glutamate impair memory retention and damage. Repairs retention and damages hypothalamic neurons. I don't think you want to deal with. See, you don't want to deal with neurotransmitters that target everything, because if you go wrong there, if the whole system goes wrong. Look, involvement of glutamate in learning and memory, glutamate dysfunction in Alzheimer's. Um, okay, the pathological changes. Let me see here. Okay, 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 okay. Come on, man. Where the article at, bro? Okay. Only available in PDF. Okay. We are present. Okay. We present evidence to support the hypothesis that do glutamate dysfunction is involved in the pathology of Alzheimer's disease and can account for many neurochemical and biological deficits observed in disease. I think when they say glutamate dysfunction, is probably like too much glutamate, not too little glutamate. Okay, so as you can see, there's a relationship between the two. Um, Let me see if I have any other questions here. Okay, what happens if your brain doesn't make enough GABA? Yeah, GABA is inhibitory, so you don't have the systems available to turn all of this excitation off. And so I would say that that's a situation like acute agitation and frank agitation, where you become disinhibited. Disinhibited. Okay, let's see here. Next, Huntington's disease patient has lower GABA. So, what would be one example? No, I don't. Okay, I mean, I don't think I can talk about low GABA, high GABA. I'm talking about GABA activity, hypoactivity or hyperactivity, just like glutamate hypoactivity and hyperactivity. I think I'm talking more like that. And I don't think your body's ever out of GABA. Is still is the activity is decreased compared to glutamate activity. So you want to keep the ship. Glutamate makes it more active because GABA is low, and so you want to keep those two balanced. But you're never out of glutamate. And off the top of my head, I can't really off my head remember the connection between GABA and Huntington's disease, because Huntington's disease involved I think the CG pair, and that's more located in the basal ganglia. Uh, that's really regulated by dopamine. So, but we were talking about GABA that's regulated throughout the entire system. So, the Huntington's disease is a specific part of an organ system. Mainly, I believe it's the intermediate loop in that basal ganglia structure. Um, Next question: if glutamate is too high due to alcohol withdrawal, what should we prefer, typical, atypical antipsychotics to balance out in GABA? Yeah. Okay. So alcohol withdrawal is basically secondary to the person was activating GABA with liquid alcohol, with liquid, and so you simply want to try to replace that with tablets. And so when they come in to for detox, I can put them on Ativan, 1 milligram 3 times a day, and just schedule it like that. And then I give them the medications like every 4 hours as needed. So if they started having more withdrawals, they can get more medications as needed. And so I've been very fortunate to be able to handle the alcohol withdrawals in that manner. Now, when it gets to the point where they may have alcohol withdrawal related seizures, if they're at risk, I'll put them on Depakote just to sort of help decrease the likelihood of that. If it evolves into more of a delirium tremens, then now you're going to have to use antipsychotics in this case, and you want to try to use Haldol. Haldol may have more evidence in that situation, so I would go with for alcohol for the deliriums associated with alcohol withdrawal. I would probably go with Haldol. As opposed to any atypical antipsychotics. I don't think that the atypical. I don't believe there's any evidence of atypical antipsychotics in delirium tremens. Let me look here. In atypical. Okay, the role. It's been a while since I've looked at this data. Okay, it was concluded that they appear to be effective and tolerable in a magic delirium, even though the evidence is limited. I still wouldn't. I would still go with the just the standard Haldol before I move to atypical antipsychotics. And the reason why is that the typical antipsychotics like Haldol have a stronger binding affinity at the dopamine receptor, and you want a higher binding affinity if the network failed. In the case of the delirium, nothing's working well. So you want a potent antipsychotic to bind those receptors to stabilize things, not a weaker one, because this is an emergency. It's kind of urgent situation. If a person can't pay attention, the person is confused. Okay, next. What does GABA have to do with anxiety and stress? Um, um, Anxiety, I guess, is the physiological reaction to the stressor, and I think the stress is just how you perceive the event. Um, but if it causes excitation, then it's glutamate. If you need to calm it down, then I would say it's GABA. GABA will be, let's say in this case, anxiety and stress will likely increase your heart rate, right? Possibly because of excessive glutamate around. Now, GABA, activation of GABA will likely decrease all those things. And you can activate GABA through people activate GABA through alcohol manually. Um, Let me see. Anna's question was so complicated. I didn't want to embarrass myself. Anna had a maybe I could. Okay, maybe it's somebody. Okay, here. Now, Trexone used for alcohol cessation, which is an oral opiate antagonist. Okay, what is the relation with GABA and opiates? And the what is relation with GABA and what's the relationship between GABA and opiate in the brain in terms of brain activities? Um, let me let me. That's a tough question for me. Did anyone want to comment on that question or anything like that? Or anyone want to make any comments so far? Okay. Okay, we're good. Okay, so Anna, let me just pass on that question because I'm not putting the things together. Okay. So also let me show you here. Okay. Okay. So what am I looking for here? Okay. The glutamate receptor is a G protein that's composed of at least 6 subunits. And this thing is really fascinating. This contraption is really fascinating. Let me see if I can find a glutamate receptor. Uh, okay, so let's look at this. Okay, apparently these are different type of glutamate receptors. Okay, here, this is what I'm looking for here. These are huge proteins that usually have at least 6 subunits, and they transcend the entire phospholipid bilayer. And basically, they receive a signal on the outside of the structure, and they translate it to the mechanism on the inside in order to create a product, in this case, messenger RNA, that's going to be taken to the cell body, and that's going to be instructions to produce whatever, to do whatever it's instructed to do. Um, and so these huge protein complexes are usually associated with either ion gates or any type of gates, and they usually control a lot of the functionality. So in this case, it's hard for me to remember the exact mechanism of glutamate in this receptor, but the binding occurs, and I believe it's the ion gate in close proximity to it that opens and causes depolarization. I believe the depolarization may have some impact on the excitation or how much it's excited. Don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've read that about the functionality of the glutamate receptor. Um, okay, let's see. Um, Okay. And let's see how long we've been going here so far. It's been 22 minutes. And so I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut it short here. And if there's any questions, then let me know. Um, if anyone have any other questions, then please let me know. Okay. Somebody had a question? Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and end this stream. Thank you very much, guys. And I'll talk to you guys later. Okay. Take care, guys. Okay, let me go ahead and turn the music down. I have 10 people watching, so I think I can go ahead and get started, okay? So, the name of discussion is mesocortical pathway, and we're going to be talking about schizophrenia, the relationship between schizophrenia and autism. These two processes seem to connect at the level of the mesocortical pathway. So damage to the medical mesocortical pathway at specific developmental periods can give you an idea of the cluster of symptoms the person will likely to experience. Some of the newer research suggests that damages to the mesocortical pathway in the earlier developmental periods of life, like before puberty, those symptoms present as symptoms that we interpret as autism. But when we look at these in the context of schizophrenia, they appear to be more negative symptoms of schizophrenia. After a certain developmental milestones are reached, then damage to that mesocortical pathway can produce hyperactivity that you would notice as prominent positive symptoms, or it could produce like hypoactivity that we recognize as negative symptoms. So the mesocortical pathway is a very important structure to sort of understand. So let me go ahead and look at the mesocortical pathway real quick. Okay, medical pathway here, schizophrenia right here. And I think the last discussion we talked about the mesocortical pathway. Let me just show you here. So here's the mesocortical pathway right here, right? Okay, so damage to this early hyperactive damage to this pathway can create hyperactivity that we interpret as positive symptoms of schizophrenia. It could also, the damage can also create hypoactivity that we commonly refer to as negative symptoms. The hypoactivity can get to a point where we can probably interpret those things, that degree of hypoactivity, severe degrees of hypoactivity, as a form of catatonia, when the person actually can't move and things like that. So this important pathway is very important. Okay, so here, let me look at his. Okay, how about if I say just positive symptoms? So hallucinations and delusions. I think I can find a better. Just the positive symptoms. Let's see here. Okay, positive symptoms. Okay, so look at this. So positive symptoms, okay, let's look at the entire clusters. Delusions, that's what you think. Hallucinations, sensory experiences. Disorganized thinking or behavior, that's the organization of your thoughts and how your thoughts flow. So look at the positive symptoms. Disturbances in the way you believe things, and disturbances in the sensory experiences, and disturbances how you organize things. So delusions are false beliefs. Two categories: things that are improbable versus things that are impossible. I got kidnapped by aliens, impossible. But it's probable that people were dressed like aliens when you got kidnapped. I'm not saying you're getting kidnapped. I'm saying you got it wrong who you got kidnapped by. Look at these delusions: persecutory, someone's after me; grandiose, referential. Things are very complicated. Referential delusions, hallucinations, auditory, visual, tactile, disorganized thinking. Your frontal lobe and should be able to suppress a lot of unnecessary information or distractions, so that you would be able to focus on one continuous train of thought. And hopefully you should be able to organize those thoughts in a way so the whole system is coherent and so you can comprehend it. In the face of schizophrenia, it seems like the filtering system breaks down and you get everything. And you have to pay close attention to patients who have disorganized thought processes, because they're trying to express something, but the filter's there. You get everything at once. It's just very challenging to make. So those are the positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Let me see, negative symptoms. Okay. Look at this. Negative symptoms, hypoactive mesocortical pathway. So everything is sort of turned down. Blunted affect, right? You don't expand as much. Don't speak as much. Don't move as much. And don't engage as much. don't experience as much pleasure. It's like everything is turned down. Um, and schizophrenia and the negative symptoms. Um, so look at these symptoms, the negative symptoms, and let's see how they compare with autism, the symptoms of autism. So remember the blunted affect, and isn't it, and then reduce emotional expressions. Isn't that one of the things we say in autism? They have the difficulty connecting socially. The reduced speech, that may or may not happen. Lack of motivation, they're simply not interested in the things that you're interested in. So trying to get them to do something they don't want to do will, definitely show lack of motivation. Um, Social withdrawal, right? Reduced experience of pleasure. I'm not sure if they have that all the time. I think that's probably frequent as in a normal population. So negative symptoms, and let's look at instead of negative symptoms of schizophrenia, let's split that autism. Okay, look, difficulty with social interactions, avoiding eye contact, and struggling to make friends. You know, Communication challenges include delayed language development. So remember, this mesocortical pathway is damaged very early, primarily before puberty. And so the other structures, things like that, I don't think they grow to the same extent. And because they don't grow, the whole system is more developmentally delayed. All of those networks have to develop themselves independently. They all develop independently. So you can get wide fluctuations in how the quality of how each of these networks work. Communication challenges, right? Language development, difficulty understanding or using verbal cues, repetitive speech patterns, restrictive language, repetitive languages. Look, problems with social interactions, problems with communications, other potential problems, sleep, GI. Okay, so I think you get the point there. Let's see, how long have we been going so far? So far at 15 minutes. I think I'll do the lecture. I'm only 20 minutes at a time. Okay. Let me go to, let me see what Google Scholar has to say. Look at this. New therapeutic options for severe autism disorder. Deep brain stimulation of the mesolimbic and mesocortical pathway. If the pathway is damaged, you may have to zap it with some electricity to get the pathway up and running again. So deep brain stimulation, I'm sure the deep brain, the device could probably recognize the frequency at which the network is working, and it can probably sort of reset the network by firing itself. That's interesting. It's interesting. I like to see how that looks like. Okay, recognizing the circuitry underlying cerebellar, blah, 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 mesocortical pathway damage, cognition, apathy, and gait. Cognition, apathy, gait. Negative symptoms of that is autism again. Dopamine dysregulation, autism spectrum disorder. Let me see this. Mesocortical pathway damage and cognition, apathy, gait, and cerebral small vessel disease. Many times I find that I always stay here on Google Scholar, and I subscribe to a lot of the main journals. I don't have it on this computer. But it helps me really put my treatment of the patients in context. Sometimes the textbooks or the learning materials may be very difficult, maybe difficult for me to digest, but coming here to the actual studies themselves are very useful. In conclusion, our study showed that 3 clinical features, cognitive impairment, apathy, and gait dysfunction, of that is strongly integrated with the damage to the mesocortical pathway and could be a common neural basis of the 3 features. SV, okay, what is, that's small vessel disease. Yeah, we do see that in small vessel disease. Okay. That's it with that. See if there's anything else interesting here. autism and dopamine. Dopamine-mediated mesocortical dopamine release influence the mesocortical pathway. And I don't want to get into that. So right now we're at 18 minutes. And so let me see if I can take a few questions to see if you have any questions. So the point here is for the students who are rounding with me, that mesocortical pathway is very important. And we see the positive symptoms of psychosis. And when it's very severe, we have to go to the typical antipsychotics like Haldol and Thorazine, because those typical antipsychotics are potent enough to sort of manage the instability in this network. Any questions? So let me see if you have any questions. Here, I have one question here. Is the mesocortical pathway something we can strengthen or repair? That's advanced. I mean, I can imagine developing implants, maybe a coupler or something like that wraps around the main trunk of the mesocortical pathway, and with radio waves, that picks up the frequency and things like that. And then maybe you can modulate your mesocortical pathway. I think we're coming into something like that. Yeah, I think it's going to happen real soon too. So yes, I think right now I don't think we don't have the technology to strengthen or repair. We just manipulate the neuron by targeting the receptors, basically. This neuron, in many cases, hyperactive, and we block the receptors to slow it down. Okay, next question is here. Is it possible for someone to be misdiagnosed with one and then they actually have the other, or both? Remember, the DSM-4 focuses on the symptomatology, and it's very difficult learning to identify specific disorders with symptomatology that's present throughout all of the different disorders. And then you have to find a certain cluster at the same time over a period of time in order to make a diagnosis. And that's very complicated. So I think our language and our terminology comes from that pursuit to try to gather the symptoms and come up deductive reasoning, I guess. But since we understand the functionality of the mesocortical pathway, I think my emphasis in my career is to sort of focus on the functionality of the pathway and see if I could master manipulating it with the tools that I have. So is it possible for someone to be misdiagnosed? Yep, all the time. One of the things I do is I try to use standard scales like the Brief Psychotic Rating Scale, the Young Mania Rating Scale for mania, the Confusion Assessment Method for delirium, the things like the CIWA for alcohol, CALS, Clinical Opioid Withdrawal Scale. So I use a lot of scales to sort of try to quantify the severity of the disorder, and at least I have some type of parameters. Okay, great. Let me know if there's any other questions here. If there are not any other questions, then it's at 21 minutes, and I know the students don't like to wait around for long. So I'll go ahead and end this. Okay, I do have another question. What's the difference between this and the mesolimbic pathway? Two different pathways. This is the one that connects your lower brain, your midbrain, your prefrontal cortex, and then your frontal lobe. And so this is covering that territory on those different lobes right here. This is your mesolimbic, okay, and that's your limbic system, this reward pathway. This is the target of a lot of the targets for substance abuse and everything. We make this pathway hyperactive, get a high. It's low, you withdraw. So these are two distinct pathways, and they serve completely different functions. Okay, here, great. Does trauma affect the mesocortical pathway? Oh my God, listen, narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths seem to have an innate predilection for this pathway, because it seems to me that the cognitive, emotional, and very soft neuropsychiatric manifestations of emotional and psychological abuse tend to manifest themselves in dysfunction in this pathway. So you're being abused. You can't remember things. You can't remember. You can't organize things. You can't. You're very forgetful. Your mood is you're very labile, very can be unpredictable. It can be impulsive. Your sleep can be disturbed, and it seems like these sociopaths, they focus on all the emotional, psychological stress that will damage this. And in fact, if certain hormones like the stress hormone, cortisol, adrenaline, all those, they tend to increase expression of glutamate, and glutamate turns everything on, and then the cells start popping. The cells, the area that's overly stimulated, start to experience a death in the nerves in that area, and so the person starts to show cognitive and neurocognitive deficits because of the hormonal and neurotransmitter imbalance and how much stress they're under. So patients with like chronic PTSD typically have very severe memory problems due to the impact of the hormones and the neurotransmitters on excessive amounts on the actual physical function and networks of the brain. Let's see. Any other questions, guys? Any other questions? Okay, so we're at 25 minutes. If there's no other questions, then I'll go ahead and end this stream for now. And we can talk about this tomorrow if you have any other questions, okay? It's a pleasure talking to you guys, and read out. See you tomorrow. Ciao, guys.